House Bill 18, the amended fiscal year 2023 budget.
The House votes to approve the mid-year budget that will take the state through June 30th of this year. Good evening and welcome to Lawmakers. I'm Donna Lowry in Atlanta. On tonight's show, we'll have legislators join us to talk about a couple of bills with bipartisan support. One would permit employees to use sick leave to care for immediate family members, and legislation that would allow the suicide death of a law enforcement officer to be considered a death in the line of duty. There are several bills focusing on district attorneys. We'll also talk about the education issues that keep bubbling up. Joining us are two journalists who are covering the session. But first, Rochelle Ritchie has the news of the day in her Capitol Report.
House Bill 18, the amended budget for fiscal year 2023, passed today in the House.
Throughout the budget, you'll see the House recognizes its needs to fund its obligations to Georgians.
HB 18 is now in the Senate for a vote. If passed by the Senate, the bill would provide $33 billion in funding.
With the additional funds that are being recognized in this budget, the House joins the governor on the wise use of tax dollars with one-time needed investments in technology and capital projects, safety and security projects, economic development projects, as well as human capital investment.
At the beginning of the year, Governor Brian Kemp made it a mission to provide property tax relief to Georgians. And with a $6 billion surplus, that mission could be complete very soon.
$1 billion in one-time homeowner tax relief grants. Our number is $100 million less than the governor's recommendation, but we're providing for the maximum exemption on assessed home value allowed by the Constitution, which is $18,000. On average, Georgians will receive property tax relief of nearly $500.
Good news for homeowners, but House Minority Leader James Beverly challenged the program and its impact on communities.
Is it not true that simultaneously you're asking local districts to absorb huge new expenses in the rising cost of health care for SHBP and pay increases? So as you push the number down the cost curve, local communities now, if you're going to take away property tax, you're going to give back $1 billion, the rising cost for SHBP and payroll, where is that in the budget? Where is it reflected that local communities now have to pick that cost up?
The $1 billion in that you're referring to does not take away from the local tax base. The state is funding that discount to local citizens that are homeowners. So there is no effect to the local cities or counties on the tax base, because that's where that $1 billion is going, to the counties and cities.
Additional human capital investments include $92 million to lower health care premiums. This funding will help victims of crime pay for medical and funeral expenses, provide psychiatric beds for those in need, and restore beds at Georgia Regional Hospital. The House is providing $5 million for the Department of Human Services to provide housing for at-risk youth. Lastly, the budget provides $128 million to the Department of Education to support the influx of students and foster programs to help prepare them for the workforce. That is my Capitol Report. I'm Rochelle Ritchie.
Thank you, Rochelle, for that report. Each day, we're seeing more and more legislation filed with hope of getting past this session. And tonight, we're going to talk about a few of those bills. Joining us now are Senator Josh McLaurin of Stone Mountain and Senator Kim Jackson of Atlanta. Welcome to Lawmakers. Did I get that right? I switched you around. I thought I did. As I was saying it, I got that around. So you're Stone Mountain, you're in Atlanta. Okay, we'll get it from here. Let's dig right into some of the sponsored legislation. And one thing I want to talk about with you is you own a farm, but you also have a bill dealing with hemp farming and some pretty serious issues surrounding that. Talk about it.
That's right. So I just introduced a bill that would allow people who want to apply to grow hemp to be able to do that even if they've had a misdemeanor for trafficking of substances, controlled substances, usually marijuana, right? Or right now the law says that if you have any felony of any kind, you cannot grow hemp. And what we know is that hemp is going to be one of our largest industries in agriculture. And so I want to open that up so more people can grow hemp. And so my bill would say, if you have a felony related to marijuana, then you got to wait 10 years before you can apply. But if you just have a random felony, that's not going to eliminate you from being able to grow hemp.
You're talking about misdemeanors.
Misdemeanors,
felonies.
Misdemeanors and felonies. So right now, our laws say that if you have a misdemeanor that is involved a controlled substance, that you cannot even apply to grow hemp. A misdemeanor. So we're talking about young people who, made a mistake. And so I'm saying, we need to make sure we open this up, give people a second chance. We actually talk about this as a second chance hemp bill. And I'm excited to have bipartisan support for others to jump in and say, yeah, let's make sure people can grow.
Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit now with you, Senator McLaurin, and let's talk about the fact that you've switched chambers.
I sure have.
You were in the House, and
right.
So if I accidentally say representative, forgive me.
I might mess it up too.
Okay, all right. You're one of the signers on a bill to allow state employees, or employees overall maybe, to use sick leave to care for immediate family members. So talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. So this is a bill that Senator Brian Strickland is working on. And the law has actually already been that if you have over 25 employees as an employer or the state of Georgia, that 5 days of sick leave per year you have to be able to use for care for an immediate family member. We think that's good policy. And what this bill will do is remove the sunset from that law, which would have had it automatically expire this year if it doesn't pass. It's interesting to think about sort of what Senator Jackson was saying about attitudes towards hemp, marijuana, some of these policies, or even felony convictions. They're common sense, the way that Senator Jackson constructs them, but it might take time, it might take years for people in the legislature to get comfortable with the idea that, some of our more traditional fears about changing policy don't actually govern the situation. And this is a situation with the paid sick leave bill where the state of Georgia has realized this is good policy. We've been doing it now for several years. We like it. We don't want it to sunset. And so it's an interesting, almost like alpha and omega. You see two sides of a legislative process that once the state has adopted a policy for several years, it starts to become part of the DNA of our policy because it's tested.
That's maybe why they had a sunset on it, because they weren't sure how it would play out. And so now they want to stick with it. We'll see how that one goes. Okay, so back over to you. You are the lead sponsor in legislation that would allow the suicide death of a law enforcement officer, anybody in public safety, to be considered a death in the line of duty. What led you to come up with this legislation?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So I actually served as an EMT for several years, back long before I was a legislator, and I worked alongside law enforcement, firefighters, and EMTs. And what we know is that people who are in public safety, they respond to us when we are at our worst. Right? Nobody calls 911 because they're excited and happy about something. We call 911 because we've experienced some type of trauma or tragedy. And so the stress level for all public safety officers, it increases with every exposure of tragedy, right? The impact that it has on mental health is significant. And so there are studies out there that indicate that firefighters, EMTs, and law enforcement officers are more likely to die by suicide than other types of work. And so I want to simply acknowledge that that is a risk factor for doing this work, for showing up and being first, the first one on, to help us in those really critical times, that one of the consequences to that, particularly given how broken our mental health system is right now, one of the results and risk could be that somebody dies by suicide. And I want to make sure that those family members that are left behind are cared for just as well as we do for an officer who is shot.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. How are family members affected by this? I know it would help them emotionally as in the grieving process, but anything else?
Right. So the indemnification fund is set aside. It's something that's constitutionally allowed that makes sure that any public safety officer who dies in the line of duty, their family receives, it's almost the equivalent of their salary for 3 to 5 years. And so what we're doing is we are trying to help keep families financially whole while they adjust to the absence of that salary. And so this would be the same thing if a public safety officer were to die by suicide. The state would step in and say, we recognize that you've had a loss and that you've lost financially, and we want to step in and help fill that gap until you can kind of get back on your feet, because we acknowledge that public safety officers, that they've cared for us and that they've showed up for us, and so we want to show up for those families in that great time of need.
So you have bipartisan support on this. But you've also brought this up before. What are you feeling this year about it? What happened with the bill before?
Sure. So it made it out of the Senate. On my bill, I have every person in the Senate who has served in public safety is a signer on that, so it is extraordinarily bipartisan. We ran into a hurdle in the House because House members were, quite frankly, concerned about, are we paying somebody to die by suicide? And, it started a really important conversation about suicide and the impact that it has in our communities and particularly in public safety. And so I'm going to continue that conversation once again. I feel very optimistic we'll get it out of the Senate, and hopefully the House will be more ready to talk more about this really critical thing, which is we need to help these families when this happens. And we also need to do the work of making sure we expand access to mental health care for law enforcement officers, firefighters, and EMTs. That's critical too. I'm not saying we do one without the other. We need to do both.
Yeah, so we'll pay attention to where that goes. Okay, Senator McLaurin, you have some legislation you're getting ready to file, and it deals with paid subscriptions. Talk about that. Which paid subscriptions?
Right.
Some of us have quite a few.
So this is kind of a fun one because, I remember seeing a tweet that was sort of going viral, not just in Georgia, about how people are frustrated because the paid subscriptions that they sign up for, maybe it's a monthly recurring fee for like a gym membership or something like that, that they were having trouble canceling it. There's no option to call or email that works, that they would either have to go in person somewhere or send, physical mail to cancel a subscription. And obviously, the businesses that are doing this, that are limiting cancellation options, are making a lot of money from the fact that it takes effort to cancel a subscription. Well, I don't think that's right. I think that if it's a one-click sign up online to sign up for a subscription, that it should be a one-click cancellation. There should be ease for the consumer. And what I love about this legislation is, there are already other states that do something like this, but this is kind of obvious bipartisan, good consumer protection legislation. And here's an inside look at sort of lobbyist relations at the Capitol. I've already heard from several lobbyists like, you're giving us work because all these big moneyed interests are going to come try to kill this bill. And typically when you're standing up for consumers in that kind of a way, you don't have all the moneyed interests on your side, right? You just got to kind of roll with common sense. So that's one thing that I'm excited to file this session.
So all those streaming services that some of us have, we'll be able to talk about that.
For sure.
I wanted to ask what else you're looking at this legislative session.
Sure. So one of my real commitments when I first was elected was to make sure that I brought forth legislation that would help care for women, children, people who are the most vulnerable. I lead and run a church for people who sleep outside, for people who are unhoused, and so I'm deeply invested in making sure that we follow up on the governor's promise to create more housing. And I'm also very much interested in making sure that we do some important criminal justice reform pieces, specifically looking at making sure people who are released from prison receive an ID. Because what I've found is that a lot of the people who are members of my church who are sleeping outside every day, it's because they left prison without an ID. And they can't get a house, they can't get a job, they can't do anything but be homeless, despite the fact that they were in a Georgia prison for many, many years in many cases. And so those are some of the kind of smaller but important criminal justice reform measures that I'm also very interested in.
Okay, anything else for you? But maybe I should ask you, what's it like getting settled into the other chamber?
It's interesting. It's a much different chamber in terms of the inside baseball, right? People who spend every day at the Capitol know the differences because it's smaller and the relationships can be different. But I think the key for anybody who's watching from outside the Capitol is, they want to see continuity in representation. They care about kitchen table issues. They care about how these billions of dollars of surplus in the budget are being spent. And so, one of the things we got to focus on is not to get too caught up in all of our inside baseball. We need to stay focused, and we need to realize that we have a real opportunity this year and next year to invest in real ways in Georgians' lives, in our state agencies that are hurting from turnover and years of neglect of some of our biggest priorities. And so I really want to connect with voters this session and inform them just how much our state agencies would benefit from a much more robust view of how to use this surplus money.
Yeah. So what is your opinion on how the session is going, just briefly?
Well,
Slow,
I think
fast, about where you expected?
it's definitely slow, but part of this is because of this focus on the budget. And I think that the majority realizes, they're waking up to a lot of realities that, not to be too partisan, but the minority party has been talking about for some time, that we've got a housing crisis. We've got a burgeoning population, people whose wages are not rising as fast as many of the costs in their life, including health care. And, just this year, Governor Kemp is talking about workforce as a priority. Well, that's been a priority. We want to invest in people. We've been talking about that for a long time because we've recognized that as the metro gets more diverse and bigger and more complex, these are the investments the state needs to be making so that we have a thriving economy.
Okay, so we're on day 12. I know you said slow too. We're going to have you back and have you talk a little bit more. I appreciate you both coming on today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
for
so
having
much.
us.
Coming up, a lot more on legislation, on housing, on district attorneys, and education.
Lawmakers is made possible by Georgia Farm Bureau. With over 80 years of helping everyone understand the importance of agriculture in our state. After all, ag is Georgia's #1 industry. Food and fiber production represents over $74 billion in output of Georgia's strong economy. The Georgia Farm Bureau legislative team works to represent producers across Georgia at the state capitol during the session and year-round. Georgia Farm Bureau, the voice of Georgia farmers.
Here's what's new this month with Passport.
Kirsten had a lot of courage. She fought for Black culture.
They could have killed you. You're exactly what we need right now. Oh my God.
What is this?
She was poisoned.
These and all your favorite shows are available with Passport. Support your PBS station and stream more with Passport on the PBS app.
We care about things that affect the lives of every American.
We are there at the front lines
to get to the heart of what really matters in every issue.
This country has not seen this in 80 years.
This extraordinary moment in American history.
You're making such a huge impact.
Trust is at the heart of what we do.
One of the easiest ways to support GPB is to become a monthly GPB sustainer. Your monthly support continues automatically month after month and supports not only the great programming that you love on GPB, but also our efforts in the community. GPB is committed to provide a trusted space for lifelong learning on the air, digitally and in person all across Georgia. All this is made possible with your monthly support. And we can't do it without you, so please donate right now at gpb.org/give. And thanks.
Welcome back to Lawmakers. I'm Donna Lowry. We're going to talk now with journalists about some of the legislation coming out of this session. Joining the show now are the politics reporter for WABE, Rahul Bali, and education reporter for the AJC, Ty Tagami. Welcome. Welcome back to you. You used to be a part of this show. Left us. Okay, I'm fine. Let's start with you. Let's talk about education. Last night we had Senator Billy Hickman on and talking a little bit about what the Senate Majority Caucus is interested in, and that's making sure there's a focus on literacy. And you've been covering this, and so tell me your thoughts on what's going on with that issue.
Well, it's not just the Senate. The House is also interested in that. The chairman of the House Education Committee was basically saying the exact same thing as the Senate, that they're interested in two main issues: safety, school safety, and literacy. So, yeah, we haven't seen any legislation yet on literacy. We have on safety, but I'm sure something's coming.
Are you thinking, where do you think it's going to focus on? Mostly third grade literacy, and because there's been a lot of talk about that. You know, that's the as I always say, the reading to, you learn to read up to third grade. After that, you're reading to learn.
Yeah, definitely younger kids, you know, kindergarten through third grade, but possibly even younger. I mean, they have been talking about preschool and pre-K, so, and if you talk to literacy experts, that's a very important age that we're not necessarily addressing. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go younger than kindergarten.
Yeah, I think that early learning is going to be a big focus with that, and I think you probably see the same thing. focus on that. We're hearing a lot about more with pre-K, and it's amazing. It's in its 20th year right now. So Raul, let's switch to you and talk a little bit about district attorneys. And several bills dealing with district attorneys came out today.
Absolutely, and let's start off with the bigger picture. There's so much conversation about how crime is being handled, how it's handled in the courts, how abortion cases could be possibly handled. And so that's why you're seeing possibly this focus on district attorneys. And two of the bills that I have right here, which I'm still trying to go through, one of them deals with the possible recall of district attorneys about how they handle cases. That's House Bill 229, which was just filed today. Also, bills filed on both sides, what would create a prosecuting attorneys oversight commission. So looking at how district attorneys are maybe handling their cases, their prosecutorial decisions. With all of this, what's going to be so interesting to me is what standards are district attorneys going to be held to? Is it because they prosecute certain cases or not? Do they prosecute a certain abortion case or not? That's in my reporting. That's because these were just filed today. That's what I'm going to be looking into is when would a prosecutor need to be recalled? When would a prosecutor need to be taken to this commission, and what are going to be those standards? That's definitely something that I'm going to be digging into as part of my reporting.
And I think a lot of people will be asking those questions. This is the bills today weren't the first of these kinds of bills we're seeing focused on district attorneys. What else?
Absolutely. Again, this is something that we've picked up on pretty early, this whole discussion about crime and how things are handled. So there's House Bill 48 that would make district attorney elections nonpartisan. There's Senate Bill 21, which if the Attorney General had to step in on certain cases, that local district attorney would have to reimburse the state or the Attorney General's office. So those are two of the other bills that again, when you put them all together, there's this definite focus on district attorneys.
Yeah, it's amazing to see. I don't think it's the last of it. We're hearing that there might even be some more coming out, and the reaction to it will be interesting to see. Let's get back to you, Ty, with education. Let's talk a little bit about the amended budget that was passed today. Good news for education on so many levels, and one of the big things was fully fund QBE. We're hearing that again this year. Talk about some other things that may have been interesting to you.
Yeah, the state has billions of extra money this year, and Governor Kemp had already fully funded QBE was his proposal, along with teacher pay raises. Well, that would be next year, but he's putting a lot of money in, and the House moved some things around. They increased. Kemp had put $50,000 per school into the budget for safety grants, and the House is recommending a 20% increase to $60,000 per school. And they're also, it's not a safety issue, but very expensive. Health insurance premiums are going up for, they call them classified employees, for non-teachers, and that's a big hit for school districts. And the state, the House is talking about phasing in support for schools so they don't have to pay so much up front.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about the school safety. Did you do some stories on what school safety issues that, in the past, the money in the past for school safety? Some of the things, what are some of the things the schools have been doing with that money?
It's been years since Kemp, and I don't remember the amount. Was it $50,000? It was.
I think it was about that.
Before the pandemic, there was money for grants, and schools have been doing all sorts of things with safety over the years, and whether it's changing the buildings or training. There's already new legislation out there, and I imagine it would cost them money. There's a proposal that would require schools to have these. I've never seen one, but these little cards with buttons on them. So
you press the button and it sets on an alarm.
Yeah, exactly.
A silent alarm.
Right. So there's legislation proposing that. There's another bill that's a little more abstract. It's about reporting and transparency instead of just schools are supposed to have these safety plans, and they're supposed to practice them instead of just informing your local emergency management agency. They'd have to inform the state. And also there was a measure that would allow I guess essentially credentialing for staff in schools who have a background that would that would lend itself to additional safety type training, so they could be like the safety go-to person in the school in an event of an emergency. And that's something the Professional Standards Commission would have to create under this legislation, an endorsement, they call it.
Yeah, it's something that everybody is talking about. So hearing about this additional money into school safety is important. And I know you've talked about there's more in that amended budget that deals with flexibility and allowing schools to do a little bit more with the money than just each school gets a certain amount.
Yeah, so the grant is $60,000 now, $60,000 per school. But if you have a school district, that has 6 schools, they get they're going to get $360,000. But some buildings may be older than others, and some may need a little more work than others. So one of the things that lawmakers want is the flexibility where a school system could use a little more money on this older building over here, but a little less on this building over here. It's the same amount of money, but giving that flexibility.
Okay. While I still have you, let's talk a little bit about some housing issues. That has been one of the big issues down here, in addition to workforce issues, but workforce issues dealing with housing too.
The budget hearings were interesting. The state economist, did his presentation and then took questions from lawmakers. So many of the questions were about housing and the whole range of things, whether it's corporations coming in and buying up homes and then renting them out, or even full neighborhoods built of single-family homes that are all built for rent. That was some of the conversation. Also, what to do about affordable housing was also a conversation. And the conversations at the Capitol are, what is that legislation going to look like? For example, on affordable housing, will the state government pass legislation that says here are the things that local governments can and can't do, or can and can't tell builders to do? Whether a home has to be at least a certain size, or will the home be allowed to have vinyl siding? Vinyl siding makes the house cheaper, but maybe if a government bans it because they want possibly nicer homes. So it's going to be interesting to see what that legislation looks like when it drops. My expectation here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we're still waiting to see. It's been an education has been a big issue, so far, but different than last year. Last year, education focused a lot on culture wars issues, that some would term it that way. But this year, we're not hearing much about that, or is it still too early?
Well, it is early, and all sorts of legislation could still be introduced. But from what we've been hearing from the leadership on both sides, they aren't outright wanting to go back to what we had last year. And look, like this year feels like a pre-pandemic year. We're going back to sort of nuts and bolts issues, safety and academics as far as education. Whereas, during the pandemic, we had all sorts of other priorities. And last year, you're right, like we were focused more on divisive concepts or banning books or parent access to school boards. So, this year they're focusing on things that I think teachers are concerned about and parents. We'll have to wait and see what kinds of bills they come out with on these issues. But literacy is something I think everybody can get behind.
Absolutely. Raul, one last thing with you, and I know you keep up with the bills. You tweet about them. How many bills are out there? So give us an update of where we are in the number of bills.
I'm a numbers geek, and we've had this discussion about it feels like this session is slow, or when is it going to get going? So, one of the things that I looked up before I came over here was there have been 542 bills and resolutions filed already. So 542. The Office of Legislative Counsel is who drafts the bills. And as of today, they've drafted 1,800 bills and resolutions. So somewhere out there in the ether are 1,300 bills and resolutions just waiting to be filed, and waiting for me and Ty to read.
That's it. That's a lot. So every day you're going at a hopper to see whether that's where all the bills come in, where we can see them and as journalists and see where we are on that. That's a lot. That's a lot of bills still out there.
There's a lot out there for us.
Yeah, okay, we're all looking for them. Well, I want to thank you both for being here today and talking about all of this, and maybe we'll have you back. We've got a lot more session to go, but that does it today for Lawmakers. We'll be back on Monday, February 6th for Legislative Day 13. Have a good night.